last Zoom of 2020, and appropriately, it's entitled The Best Gift You Can Give to Yourself. And you will find out what that is as we go along. 2 housekeeping details. Please mute yourself so we don't hear any background noises. I'll be asking some questions, and if you would respond in the chat box. Hopefully everybody is familiar with Zoom by now, or probably everybody is really zoomed out. But let's give the chat box a try and tell me where you are. I'm in Sarasota, Florida. Where are you by using your chat box? Okay. Los Angeles, Utica, Atlanta, San Diego, Tampa, Huntington Beach, nice place. Okay, so everybody, I'm assuming, is familiar with the chat function, and so let's go. Again, welcome you to the best gift you can give to yourself. I'm Jane Goldner, and with me today is Sunny Nastase, who you will meet later. She is an outstanding individual whom I've known since 2011 when I interviewed her for the first edition of my book, You Can Have Your All, Women Driven to Success. We're going to be covering a top line of the material in the book, with the exception of the toolkit. So if you want to take a deeper dive, you can get the book on Amazon, as you can get most books. Again, it's You Can Have Your All, very purposefully named, Women Driven to Success. Okay, so let's start with things that other people won't tell you, what I call hidden truths. And these are the bullet points that we're going to be covering over the next 30 minutes. It is not your role to be everything to everybody. And we're going to talk in depth about how we got here and why it's not okay. Secondly, we'll talk about there is no universal it all. Back in 2010, we started that whole discussion about whether women can have it all or can't have it all, as though there's some universal it all for all women. And again, that's why I purposely named my book, You Can Have Your All. Then we'll be talking about the fact that there is no such thing as work-life balance. And I know that's heresy, but there is no such thing, and we keep beating ourselves up when we don't have it. And lastly, we'll talk about the fact that to be successful, you do not have to be a CEO, a senior leader, or a multimillionaire entrepreneur. It is your definition of success. And let me give you an example from one of the interviewees in the second edition of the book. Sarah is a millennial, and at 26, she wrote a business plan to have a women's boutique. And she got the funding, plus putting in her own money and paying her borrowed money back very quickly. She has a very successful shop in Omaha, Nebraska, such that in 2017, she was named a change maker by the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce. And she was so excited. I talked to her, and she said Monday, Cyber Monday, she actually had 300 orders, which was better than last year. So that's her success. Let's dive into, it is not your role to be everything to everybody. So I have to go back in time a little bit and talk about prior to World War II, women's roles were very clearly defined. We were at home, taking care of the home, taking care of the children, making sure dinner was on the table when our husbands got home. Well, along came World War II, and men went off to work and left all these jobs vacant, and women needed to fill in. They were in shipyards, they were in munitions plants, and all the other jobs that men vacated to go off to war. And that's when women realized, wow, I really like working out of the home. However, War was over, men came home, and women were sent home. Those that stayed in the workforce were demoted to lower paying jobs. And then if we looked to the 50s and 60s, along came Betty Friedan and the feminine mystique. And it was all about the fact that these women were educated. They knew they had skills beyond the home. They wanted to work outside the home, but there were a lot of barriers to entry. Fast forward again to now, and we're doing dishes, diapers, and $1 million deals. Is that okay? Well, I know some of you on here have heard my story before, but it's worth repeating because it's a real red flag to anybody who's now acting like everything to everybody. So when I was in my 30s, I was married and I had 2 young sons. I was working full time and I was in my doctoral program. And one day my housekeeper quit. And I said to my husband, oh, don't worry, I can do that in my spare time, as I rolled my eyes. And for about 3 weeks, that worked out really well. The 4th week on a Monday morning, I woke up with chest pains. And I thought, of course I have chest pains. Look at all the roles that I'm juggling. It's stress, it'll go away. So obviously the story is Tuesday, nope. Wednesday, nope. Thursday, nope. Stress didn't go away, still had the chest pains. My husband said, you have got to go to the doctor. So on Friday, off I went to the doctor. He did an EKG, called me into his office, and he said, Jane, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but you've had a heart attack. Well, that turned my world upside down. And I went into bed on Friday when I got home from the office and thought the whole weekend, how did I compromise my heart? I do cardio, I do yoga, I eat right. I mean, I'm a healthy person. How did that happen? Well, the good thing that came out of being told I had a heart attack was that I started thinking about the fact that if it happened to me and I think I'm in good shape, it has to be happening to other women. And so I began really thinking about the book, You Can Have Your All. Well, just like the Chicago song, my favorite band, by the way, Hard Habit to Break, it is a hard habit to break, to be everything to everybody and then stop. So let me tell you the story. Several years later, it was Mother's Day, and my husband and my 2 sons made breakfast for me, and we were sitting out on the porch. And of course, like many of us, I have a perfectionist syndrome. And I said, it's Mother's Day. Tell me how I can be a better mother. And without missing a beat, my younger son, who shall remain nameless, said, well, Mom, you can start by taking the broom out of your ass. And I thought to myself, oh my God. After I scraped myself off the floor and my knuckles were turning white on the arms of the chair, I said to him in my best coaching and consulting voice, can you tell me more about that? And he said, yeah. He said, you're working nights, you're working weekends. You are bringing so much stress into this house. I can't even talk to you. So I told you it's a hard habit to break. And he was right. Out of the mouths of babes, do I wish different words came out of his mouth? Absolutely. But it was great feedback because I was working with a military client that I'd worked with for 15 years, and they had their meetings at nights and weekends. And I had other clients during the week, and I was just making everybody in my house crazy. So it really slapped me back into reality, but I have to add a third funny episode from this very same son. I did pull back from consulting and had fewer clients. And one day he came home from school and he saw me alphabetizing the spices in the kitchen. And he said, Mom, you have got to get more work. So I guess you can't win. But the moral of the story is we don't have to be everything to everybody. So in the book, there's an everything to everybody checklist of over 30 behaviors. But I'm just going to talk about a few that coaching clients and women in the workshops that I've done have told me the ones that are top of their lists, and see which ones resonate with you. First, I want everyone to like me. So I say, yes, when my head is screaming, no. And that's an issue that a lot of we women have, is that we want everyone to like us. And here's a flash. No matter what you do, everyone is not going to like you. It's one thing to want respect from everybody, but it's unreasonable to think that everybody is going to like you. And so we really need to get that piece of it out of our head. The other is, it's okay that no is a complete sentence. And I understand that sounds pretty harsh. So a colleague of mine taught me about the gracious no. And the gracious no is, you say no, but you provide an alternative. So for example, when I lived in Atlanta, I'd often get these phone calls from charities to ask me if I would take the envelopes around the neighborhood, you know what I mean, and collect money for the charity. Well, with my sons and my full-time work and school, I just couldn't do it. So I learned to say, I'm sorry, I really can't do this. I have a full schedule, but I know some of my neighbors either work at home or work part-time, and they might be able to help you out. And of course, my neighbors didn't love me so much, but it was a way to give them an alternative. Another example is, it's okay when your boss asks you to do one more thing that's an emergency and your plate's already overflowing. It is fine to say, I'll be happy to do that if that's what you want me to do right now, but tell me, what can I put on the back burner? And that's not just something I made up. I have validated that with bosses, and they're fine with that. It's just that we don't ask. Second, everything to everybody behavior. I try to do it all. I overcommit. And it's the overcommit piece that creates the problem. And part of our overcommitting problem is that we say something's going to take 15 minutes and it takes 30. And so we're stressing ourselves out because we're running late, and then we can't possibly get to everything that's on our schedule because we don't have enough time. The third thing is, I evaluate myself against perfectionist standards. It's really what's in our head that we believe other people expect of us. And so instead of really thinking about our standards and what we expect of us, we're thinking about what others do. And so it escalates our own standards. And we get into this whole perfectionist syndrome. And you know what? Most times, good is good enough. I have mental fragmentation. I have a hard time focusing. This is one of the differences between, and I'm generalizing, I know, between men and women. Men tend more to be unifocused. When they're at work, they almost have blinders on about work. And when they're outside of work in different roles, they can focus on the particular role they're involved in at the time. Women tend to, when they're at work, be thinking about their roles outside of work. And when they're outside of work, be thinking about their roles in work. And so we try to multitask. And if you've read the latest research, you'll know that multitasking is not a more effective and efficient way to get things done. One of my coaching clients said, I go from calm to stress in 0 to 60 seconds. And this happens when we are so stressed out, we really don't have calm. And think about me with the room story. I was so stressed out doing so much, being everything to everybody, that when my younger son came in to talk to me, if he looked at me the wrong way, I was at 0 to 60. And I think many of us are that way because we are, particularly now, juggling so much that we're easily tipped into the stress of 0 to 60. And lastly, I feel uncomfortable confronting people on issues that are important to me. And this is because we really haven't learned how to negotiate well and how to confront constructively. And both of those things are really everyday occurrences if you think about it. But the problem, particularly with constructive confrontation, is that we have this tape in our head, what our mother told us: if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. but rather you should be thinking about, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And if you can say it in a way, you can confront anybody about anything. And so those are two important skills to learn. And I go in depth in the book, a chapter on each of those. So looking at that list, can you identify with any of those? Or is there another everything to everybody behavior that you relate to? And just bullet it in your chat box. Saying yes to everything, absolutely. Somehow we never got programmed to say no. Yeah, hard time focusing. Right now we have so much on us, it is really hard to do. And especially if you're homeschooling. Okay, yes, 60 seconds. Yes, to more than one. We keep saying, oh, yes to more than one of these. Well, and that's interesting that you say that, Erica, because when I do this in a workshop, I watch heads nodding up and down and laughing as they're checking all 30 plus of them. So yes. All right. So let's move on. And I want us really to move from 2020 has brought us a lot of challenges, and we all know those challenges because we've suffered them more or less. But I wanted to move on to the so what. So what can we do about that to have a really great 2021? And so that gets us into hidden truth number 2, that there is no universal it all. Take a minute to watch this video because it relates to what we'll be talking about. I bet when you first saw those balls, you thought, of course, they're all moving in a circle. And that's the point about it all. When we started talking about that in 2010, it was, can we have it all? Yes, we can. No, we can't. It was this universal it all for all women. And I know that if I asked you to put your all into the chat box, which I won't ask you to do because that's probably take more than a sentence, we would have different it alls, or certainly variations of a theme. And it's like when we look at those balls going around in a circle, we assume they're going in a circle. All of them are going the same, all of them. But when we look behind that, we actually see each ball is on its own path, which is very much like us. And that's why it's about your all, not it all. We might look like we're moving together, but behind it, we're really driven by our individual all. So can we flip to the next? I'm sorry. Will you go back to that slide? I think I didn't want us to jump ahead. So let's just talk about your all. And if you think about what your all really is and how you get to it, that truly is your roadmap, and it's your core. We're used to thinking of organizations as having a core, a mission, a vision, a set of values. But we never think about ourselves and that we should have a personal core. And we'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. Okay, Christian, thanks. Hidden truth number 3, which is heresy. There's no such thing as work-life balance. I think work-life balance is as achievable as world peace. And if you have the solution to world peace, let's talk, and then I'll talk about work-life balance. But there's no such thing. I think we tend to think of work-life balance as a scale of justice, where we've got work on one side and all the other roles that we do on the other side. And I've never quite understood that, since work is a role that we play, albeit a big one, but why do we separate it out? And as I've worked with people over time, I've come to realize that the people who say, I work to get to the good stuff in life, need to question what job they're in, what industry they're in, what they're doing every day for all that time. It's not really pursuing their passion, because if they were pursuing their passion, it would be but a role that they play. Now, I understand that some people live to work, and that's their primary focus is work, and no judgment there for sure. And that happens a lot of times early on in life, before we get married, if we have children, before we get into other kinds of roles, we do focus on work. And as one woman I interviewed said, when I first took a job at this firm, I spent so much of my time at work to show them I was a team player. But once I did that, I began to establish boundaries, and I didn't so much live to work anymore. Some of us work to live, and that's fine. The point being that the time you spend at work should be time pursuing your passion at work and enjoying the other roles that you play in life. And most of us, I would guess, are somewhere in between, but it's important to know where that in between is. And so what is the solution if it's not work-life balance? It's something called role integration. And remember, I mentioned the core. Role integration starts with defining your core, your mission, vision, and set of values. And if you think about your core as a person, then your mission is your head. It's the reason you're here, just not in your work life, but in your whole life. What's your purpose? Your vision is your heart. It's, if you were working your mission on all cylinders, what would you be at your best? And then your values are your arms and legs. It's how you live out your mission and vision. It's your decisions between yes and no. So on a kind of a interesting example of yeses and nos, maybe what your focus in life is, one of your values is become wealthy. Well, you can work hard, use your money well, and become wealthy, or you can rob a bank. Both will get you there, but your values will tell you which road to take. So let me give you an example. My mission, my rational, logical reason for being here is to help other people learn as I continue my own learning. And that's true whether it's in my personal life or my professional life, it's the same. My vision is I want to be perceived or thought of as a light that guides people down unforged paths, always showing them how much they can be. And if people say that about me, then I've lived the right life. And there was a hospice nurse who said one of the concerns her end-of-life patients had was they wanted to make sure that they lived the right life. And I know if you define your core, you will have lived your right life. And my values are 3. And people ask me, how many core values should I have? 3 to 5, because these are values that you would not compromise backed against a wall, even for $1 million. So mine are family and integrity and health. I wake up every day saying, I am going to take time to be healthy so I don't have to take time to be sick. And I do something every day to exercise, to stay healthy. Family became a very important value to me. When I lived in Atlanta, at some time, I worked for the Coca-Cola company, and I worked at a division that was not, excuse me, downtown in headquarters. It was a very intrapreneurial division. I had a lot of flexibility, both in time and job. Well, my division was sold, and I had the opportunity to have a really wonderful career if I went downtown to corporate headquarters. My sons were young, and just from my observations of people at corporate, I knew that I'd be leaving at sunrise and coming home after sunset and missing their school activities and their sporting activities. And so I had to say, no, thank you. I appreciate the offer, but I really have to honor my value of family. And so with every choice comes a trade-off. So I chose to honor my value of family, and I became a consultant. And as you know, if you have your own business, you don't have that steady paycheck. That's why I traded off. It's a roller coaster until you can level set your business. So it's very important to identify your core, your mission, your vision, and your set of values. And then once you do that, the way role integration plays into it is I ask my coaching clients to create a pie chart of how they spend a typical week. And I know there's no typical week, but we can all imagine one, and how they spend those hours after they list the various roles that they play. And when they look at the core about what they say is important to them, their priorities, and how they're spending their time, it is so misaligned and so out of sync, it is the biggest aha. And then I ask them to do another pie chart that says, if you spent your time aligned with your core, what would your time look like? And I tell them that that's where they're doing the work. But you can't flip a switch and say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start spending my time that way. You have to have a light touch on yourself and know that it's a journey. The last hidden truth is, to be successful, you don't have to be any one of those: a CEO, a senior leader, a multimillionaire entrepreneur. And it really comes from that whole discussion, I think, that started with Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg's first book. It sounded like in the book that she's saying, to be successful, you have to do these things, get a seat around the table, do all these things to become a COO like she is, or some C-suite level person. But that's the shoulds that are in our head. It's really important to define what you care about, and you do that through your core, which we just talked about. If you define your core, you get focused on what your success is. Let me give you some ideas of what some other women whom I interviewed have said is important to them on their journey to success. So the first one is to be yourself rather than trying to fit in by being someone you're not. And this was said by somebody who's actually a retired executive. And so she's older. And you can imagine back when she was in school and in engineering, she was the only woman in her class. And when she graduated, for family reasons, she moved from New York to Georgia. And she got a job with a utility company. And they put her out in rural Georgia on the line to help learn the business. And she said, I was coming home cussing and acting like the guys on the line, to one day my husband said to me, I don't know who you are. And it really woke her up to, she just had to be who she is and stop trying to fit in. And it must have worked because she became an executive in that company. You can have your all, just not every day. And that piece of advice came from Lorianne Goldman, who at the time was the CEO of Spanx when I interviewed her. And she was married, has 3 sons. And she said, I travel a lot, I'm away from family, and I'm totally focused on my family. But when there's some important family occasion, at the time, I think she had just had one of her son's birthdays, she said, I took off of work and I was totally focused on my family. So she said, the whole idea of trying to balance your life every day is not realistic. But if you know what's important to you, it's about having it over time. I love this one, follow the 80-20 rule. It was told to me in the interview with Dara Redler, who was a vice president of legal at Coca-Cola at the time. She's now the general counsel at Tilray. And I figured if it came from an attorney, it was good advice. She said, and this is the operative phrase, when I know it's right and 80% good, I go with it. The next 20% that I spend trying to make it more perfect and more perfect is a waste of my time. Set expectations with your family, friends, and colleagues. As I told you from that other interview, first prove yourself that you're a team player, you're willing to pitch in, but then set boundaries. And people need to know those boundaries. They're not mind readers. Have a light touch on yourself. This came from a woman, Joy Phoenix, who at the time was the vice president at A&E Network. And now she actually has her own production company. And she kept beating herself up over mistakes she made till finally her boss said, Joy, take a powder, have a light touch on yourself. You're going to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes and move on. Don't keep wallowing in those. The next one is find mentors and sponsors who care about you. And this was told to me by a woman who had a very roller coaster kind of life. And when I talked with her, she was the global director of organization development. And she said, I left home when I was 17, got married, had children, hadn't finished high school. But she said, along the way, I had mentors and sponsors who really cared about me and helped me develop to the person I am now. And interestingly enough, she's now in her PhD program. It's very important to know the difference between mentors and sponsors. A mentor is somebody who speaks with you about your career, about your personal life, can give you advice. A sponsor is someone who talks about you, who has the political capital to make things happen for you. If you're an entrepreneur, it's venture capital or introducing you to people who can give you business. If you're internal, it's somebody who can help you get plum assignments, get visibility to the right people. So both are great, but it's really important to have sponsors. And the last one is ask, will it matter when I'm 80 years old? And this was told to me by Jane Stevenson, who is the vice chair of CEO planning at Korn Ferry and CEO succession. And she travels around the world with CEO succession planning. And she said, when my children were young, they packed their bedtime stories in my suitcase. No matter where I was in the world, I'd step out of the meeting, I'd read them their stories, I'd sing them their songs, I'd jump back in the meeting. It's never affected my career, but I knew what was really important. And now I have saved the best for last. I want to introduce you to Sunny Nastase. Sunny and I met in 2010 or 11 when I interviewed Sunny, who was an executive at UPS for the book. And she and I became instant friends. We related in a very personal way. And I loved her story. I loved her lessons. And what I love most about Sunny is that she's had this amazingly successful career. She's always volunteering in the community, and she is never too busy to help young women through mentoring and sponsoring. And she's the most grounded person I know. So with that, Sunny, I have a few questions for you.
Thank you, Jane. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to ask you some questions, but you can take it in any direction that you want. My first question is that, in fact, you have been successful in creating and getting your all. How did you decide what you wanted to be when you grew up? How did you learn the strategies to get you there?
Well, first of all, again, thank you. And Jane, I thought I was the only person that alphabetized my spices. I never knew that about you. Perfect.
Apparently not. That's why we like you. That's why we liked each other.
It's very efficient, right? Well, welcome everybody. And I just want to say also that I think, Jane, your strategies for the discipline of thinking that you offer in your book are amazing. And I thank you on behalf of not only your guests, but so many who've become better because of the strategies that you recommend. You know, I very early along, I want to say in my 20s, I made a very conscious decision, and it sort of boils down to this. I wanted to be on a path, not on a raft. I know that I've shared that with you before, Jane, but to me, a raft sort of drifts and goes wherever, and a path has a very clear, here's where it is that I'm going to end up. So for me, I thought, well, if I'm going to be on a path, the choice of that path should be me. And so much like what you discovered in your work, I said, well, what are the things that are really, really important to me that will help me get to an end goal that is satisfying, deeply satisfying to me? So my undergraduate degrees were in psychology and anthropology. My graduate degree in organizational dynamics. So if you sort of wrap that all together, what do I really love in terms of the way I engage? It's people, teams and communities, how they all interact together to create outcomes. And so I said, all right, well, I do love marine biology, but what do I really want to do? I want to work with people and teams and outcomes. And so that was a sort of a core value of mine, to use your lexicon. The second is, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, or even early 20s, there were no role models for me in business, which is where I thought I could use those gifts that I just talked about in those core areas. There weren't any women for me to look up to. There were very, very, very few minority men even. And I really had a heart for trying to change the world I saw with my eyes to be more inclusive of women and minority individuals of all kinds. And so my discipline became, how do I take my real core interest in teams and people and behavior and outcomes, and this idea that there's nobody there for me to look up to show me the way to be a woman in that room. And it came down to, well, then the person that looks like me in the room is going to have to be me. That just was my sort of early decision. And so I went straight at Fortune 50 companies and said, I want to be the only woman in the room. I want to use my gift of people and teams and outcomes to become somebody else's role model. If I can do that, if I can give someone a chance to look at me, I'll fill that space. So I came to that really early. I would also say that that was a pretty intentional approach, right? It was very much in the vein of what you're speaking to your audience about. Is it's not by accident. It comes from an integrated understanding of yourself. And so I had sort of maybe 3 or 4 key strategies I'll touch on. Know my strengths and how to exploit them. And I use that word pretty carefully because it's a very strong word, how to exploit my strengths. how to make sure that they're seen and used became a discipline. Um, Second is to buffer my weaknesses. And I think a lot of us beat ourselves up on where we're weak. And you spoke about that with your associate or your client. I just thought, well, okay, I'm weak in these areas. I need to find team members, some training, choose my path so that I'm not stepping all over my weaknesses all the time, because they're always going to be there. So that's a second. A third and really important part of my early strategy that followed me all the way through was not to wait to be asked or rewarded. So Jane, you've heard me say this before, to grab it with both hands. If I see an opportunity that aligns with my gifts and my opportunity becomes a way to contribute in a big way, I'm not going to wait and sit back and want people to notice me. So that was a key strategy early and drove me straight up in my career at UPS. And then the last, and I'll talk about this maybe just a little bit if we've got time, is to develop and harvest a really powerful brand. So you really think about that in terms of mission and vision and values, and I think of it in terms of brand. But that's kind of how I decided what to do and some of the things that I used to get me there.
Great. Thanks, Sunny. That's great. Okay, question 2. Along the way, as you built your career, you also got married. You have 3 children,
Mhm.
1 set of twins, I might add, and dealt with aging parents at the same time. How did you juggle all those balls? Because that's a question a lot of women have,
Yeah,
even before they become a family. They're
right.
thinking about, how can I do that and build a career?
Absolutely. I love that you asked me that, and I love that you speak about that and help people, because I've actually watched women take themselves out of opportunities because they're worried about even the possibility of becoming overwhelmed and failing at everything. So it's a big question. So I'll just come right out and say to you and your audience, I believe thoroughly, or I wouldn't be on this call with you, that you cannot have it all. There is no all. And learning to be really mindful is the key. So I'm gonna answer your question this way. Number one, and the very most important thing that I use as a tool not to feel overwhelmed by all of that and to juggle, is editing. So when I think about editing, and I'm going to call with other women, so I'll use my woman self to answer this question about how I do it. You're going to notice my nails are not done. You're going to notice I'm not wearing contacts, I'm wearing glasses. I have edited out and taken away things in my life that I don't need and don't bring me joy. So I didn't have time to sit in a nail salon and get my beautiful eyelashes, and then feel good that I was accomplishing the high quality things that I really did value, like story time with my kids or being at a baseball game. Um, or being even in a bathtub to get the relaxation that I needed. So driving out the noise. And I used some maybe more superficial editing, but there was also editing of, hey, thank you for the play date. I really appreciate that you've invited me to come over with my toddler, but I've got enough on my plate right now that here's what I can do. You're welcome to come on over, climb in the basement with them and watch a movie, but here's where I'm focused. I can't be at a play date at your house. We can do it at mine. So I found ways, you called it boundaries, I think, to say I'm pulling things out of my life that I don't absolutely need to do. I actually left doing some volunteer work one time at a place that I loved, but I was finding that what I was doing was reading the last month's minutes in the parking lot on the way to run into the meeting. And I'm thinking about your list that you gave us earlier. I was feeling completely overwhelmed. I had to walk in there and say, I love being on your board. I value the work that this organization does, and I hope you feel like I've contributed, but I'm stepping back now. And I needed to do that because I had a huge job and did not want to feel overwhelmed. I want satisfaction and I want quality in my life, and doing everything all the time was not working for me. So editing is really number one. Editing also took the form, a little bit painful when I was younger, of having a nanny and a housekeeper. I gave up my spending money to do that. And I'm glad that I did. It brought me a great deal of space to be better at the things that were truly important to me. So in my mind, whether it be Jane, you being an author, or my college roommate being interior designer, you know that editing is really important to your success, and it certainly was important to mine. I think another key feature is really organization. So we talked about SPICE alphabetizing, but I actually had spreadsheets for my kids whole summer, what camp they were in, who was going to pick them up, when the puppet show was. And being that kind of organized for me allows me to not be multitasking all the time because stuff is figured out. So you know from me speaking with you that I need some quiet time. So organizing my morning quiet time to wake up really early became another discipline to juggling those balls. So I would say that essentially not overcommitting, being able to say no, which you talked about, being focused and organized, and recognizing that there's just some stuff that's going to have to pass me by, and I'm really good with that. I'm not feeling like I'm less than because I don't have my plate this high. I'm feeling good that I've got boundaries and that I've got organization and that I'm okay pushing things out of my way.
And, it's really interesting because some of the other women I interviewed talked about, sometimes we eat on paper plates and that's okay. I get my dry cleaning picked up and delivered. It's all those editing out things. And it's a big one is being able to ask for help and not assuming people are mind readers and can determine when you need help.
True. Absolutely true, Jane.
All right. Question 3. You left a great legacy at UPS, including a cutting edge women's leadership development program. So what do you believe and have learned are the key elements for women to develop into successful leaders, if that's what they choose to do?
Yeah. That probably, that women's leadership development program and the work that I did there is probably the thing that when I'm 80 and I look back and said, did I matter? That's it right there. And I must say I learned as much from being there for those women as they did from the work that we created together. So so thank you for bringing it up. Okay, so there's a lot of things that I learned with respect to that. Let me share them. And I also think, and it's really not the same for women. Becoming a leader, or let's say success at what you love, is not this. It's not equivalent for women and men. It just isn't. Maybe it will be at some point. So I'll share some things. Certainly, I believe that an authentic but powerful brand is materially important to women. So when I say authentic, I do not mean that you have no filter. I do not mean that you're exactly the same person at home as you are at work. That's not what I mean. I mean, knowing your differentiated value, where you can impact the organization, unique from others, being consistent and clear about it, and looking for ways to have your brand deliver results. I think that is a crucial part of becoming a successful woman at whatever venture. The second, and I know that you'll love this one, Jane, is I think aligning your personal values to your work is mission critical for women to extract satisfaction. We get stretched very thin. And if you can't do what you love, then you begin to resent what you do. So for me, that very program that you brought up to help women, I told you that was important to me from the age of 20. And so being able to bring it to work and make it a part of my work life and my work history, that alignment to me brings women satisfaction, allows us to be focused and disciplined in our work life because it brings us value right there. Another is when to grab an opportunity and when to let one pass. So I talked about my personal brand, and I'll mention to you that one of those words that I use to define my personal brand in my head, and I'm going to ask everyone a question about this if we have time, is really this idea of being transformational in a business. Well, that's a big fat word, transformational, but I really looked for opportunities that aligned to that. So if a very tactical something came by, hey, Sunny, would you like to be on this project? If it didn't support my brand and my superpowers and my gifts, I let it go. Other things I went hard after, as I've said to you before. I'm going to go to give you another kind of what women need. And I think it's really important to say this one a little slower. Know when we're in a dark place, because they come. Failure comes, a really nasty boss comes, an overwhelming family situation comes. And there's nobody that escapes that. But being able to know, at least for me and the women that I worked with, okay, I'm in that dark place. I can look right at myself in the mirror and say that I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to come through it. I'll be better. Right now, I'm just surfing this tornado that I'm in, and I'm going to be fine. As opposed to really taking yourself into the dark place. It's kind of saying, it's around me here. Here's where I am, but I'm going to come through this, and having faith in myself, in yourself, that's a deliverable. And then I think using powerful language. So for women, not to say things like, maybe we should, or start a sentence by, I probably wrong, but here's an idea. I think women a lot of times dismiss ourselves in the room before we even have the power that we know is behind our words. So that's the second to last one. And then the last thing I learned, Jane, you touched on, but I'll add to. You talked about finding mentors and sponsors, and I think you're exactly right about that. But being a worthy protege is really important. So I'll give you just one example, because we have a limited time together today, and maybe we can have some questions. But a worthy protege is not a 911 protege. We don't only call up when we need help or advice. We invest in that relationship. We demonstrate that we're growing from those relationships. We try to bring value to our mentor or sponsor. And there's great ways to do that. But those are kind of some recommendations that I have that I've taken from that program that you mentioned.
I'm just going to piggyback on a few things you said. One of those words that need to be eliminated from women's vocabularies is just. And I'm just fill in the blank.
Yeah.
I'm just an assistant. I'm just a this. I'm just a that. It diminishes us, and sounds like we're not making ourselves important in what we do.
Right.
I want to echo your whole value add orientation. We have to know what our value add is, whether it be to a sponsor relationship as the sponsee, if that's a word. What are we bringing? And our sponsor would expect us to work at the gold standard if we're going to be, if we're going to take advantage of what that sponsor has to offer us. So I totally agree. It's a two-way relationship for sure. Okay, Sunny, so much in so short a time. We need more of you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Sunny. Hang on, because we are going to get to some Q&A.
Okay.
I want to give, if you flip to the next slide, want to talk about a couple of things. And as I mentioned, this is a very upbeat session. It's talking about what's possible, which is a lot in 2021. It's a fresh start compared to 2020. And the best gift you can give to yourself is this roadmap. If you think about your core, it is really the beginning of your roadmap. It tells you what's important to you, what your priorities are in terms of your mission. That's your starting point. Your vision is the end of your roadmap, and your values are the road you take going from point A to point B. And we all know that when we go on a road trip, if we know where we start and where we end, we can figure out the best way to get there. And so the best gift you can give to yourself is actually to have that focus, to have that roadmap, so you're not depending on what everybody else tells you you should be. So it's about, as Sunny said, being intentional. And you have to make it known. It's good that you've defined it and you know your roadmap, but unless you get it out there with visibility, then who's going to know? So it's all about confident communication. And didn't add that in the book, unfortunately, but it is in the online course. The online course is a companion to the book. And I did add that piece about confident communication. But the whole thing is about going for your all by creating yourself. So, shall we open it up for any questions? You can connect with me on social media. And also you can go to my website to find more about the book. I believe there's a free chapter, but it's available on Amazon. You can get the online course, and you can also apply for one-on-one coaching. So, do we have questions here? Someone's typing.
Jane, I see one question from Ashley.
Okay.
She says, noticing a young gal on the chat, what advice would you suggest we give our daughters to start their path to have their all?
First of all, I'd say how young, but I'm a big believer in girls are never too young to start believing they could be anything they want to be with the willingness and the ability. And those are two really important things, willingness and ability. And I think what's important when they're girls is to allow them to explore whatever they might have an interest in, and they'll get to a lot of no's before they get to yes. And so as in young girls, allow them to think they can be anything with the caveat of willingness and ability, allow them to explore. When we're talking about young women, let's say you're in your 20s, the same message is true. It's begin to define, what's important to you, your mission, your vision, your set of values, your core, keeping in mind that the priorities within the core will change over time, but the essence of the core won't. And be willing to hear a lot of no's before you get to a yes. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way we learn. Sunny, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, no, but I did see a question come across for me in the chat. And the question was, when I got started at UPS, did I have a mentor who helped? I want to say I've had a lot of great people in my life, certainly that have brought value to me, but I'd like to take a moment to say that I believe that I had an amazing guide. I don't know that I would call him a mentor, but I'm going to say this is a gentleman who's deceased, and I'll just say his name. He's worth remembering. His name was Art Washington, and Art was an African-American guy who was sort of assigned to look after me, because when I showed up there, I came in as a vice president, and I was a woman, an outsider, and a VP, and those three things never happened. So I was sort of already on the periphery. I was resented, and they used to call me off the street as opposed to a new hire. So Art gave me a precious gift. What he said to me is, you have a chance that others would give a lifetime for. Be mindful when you're in the room of your uniqueness, you're different, and you need to be there for all of us. And so Art made me realize in a very real way that whether it be African-American people, gay, lesbian, transgender people, Latino people, they weren't in that room. I was the different one. And he made me really realize that there was power and there was an opportunity to give back by owning that seat. And I think that helped me because I was very serious. So while he wasn't a mentor in the traditional way, he gave me a strong stance of wanting to really be successful for others. And that was a tremendous asset to me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sunny. More questions?
Great question.
I think we're about to wrap up. You can get in touch with me or Sunny. Do you want to tell them how to get in touch with you if they have more questions?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you both my Gmail and my LinkedIn. Gmail is sdnastase@gmail.com. And I'm in LinkedIn. You can search me under Sunny Nastase, Nastase.
And you know what? I know we send out a survey after the session, and we will send you the deck, and we can also send you the contact information if you didn't get a chance to put it in your phone or write it down. But I want to leave you with what our Vice President-elect Kamala Harris said at her acceptance speech, which I think is so germane to our whole conversation and to the question about what do we tell our daughters? Dream with ambition. When we get older, lead with conviction, and see yourself in a way others may not, simply because they've never seen it before. I think Sunny spoke to that. But know that we will applaud you every step of the way. We are so proud of women first. We are so proud of women who follow in their footsteps. We're so proud of the women who help the women who are coming up behind them. I will never forget sitting in an audience when Madeleine Albright was speaking, and she was asked a question from a woman who apparently was not in a great environment for women helping women. And she said, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. So we all want to stay out of that place. And I think as we develop in our careers, and I think where Sunny and I are in our careers, we have a real huge focus on helping other women become successful in whatever each woman defines as her success. So thank you. We appreciate your time and attention. We hope you walk away with a lot of good information and a lot of good reflecting to create your roadmap in 2021.